The Battle of Lexington and Concord was the first military engagement of the colonists and the British. The British were on their way to Concord when the Americans fired upon them 6 miles out of Concord. The Americans then retreated to Lexington. The British proceeded to Concord and destroyed all the military stores that were there. When the British marched into Lexington, they met the American soldiers. After a short skirmish, the Americans fled into the woods. But on the way back from Lexington, the British came under fire from the American troops and cover all around them. This battle helped Americans learn what the British tactics were. Next battle was the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga. The Battle of Fort Ty wasn't even a battle. Ethan Allen, Benedict Arnold, and the Green Mountain Boys met in Hans Cove across from Fort Ty. They got to the Fort Ticonderoga, and Ethan Allen ordered Captain Diller Place to give up the fort. Diller Place said, on whose authority? Ethan Allen then stated, I demand it in the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress. This fort gave the Americans an advantage over the narrowest part of the lake, effectively cutting off the British supply line to Quebec City. They soon built Mount Independence on the Vermont side of the lake. Next battle is Battle of Bunker or Breed's Hill. The Battle of Bunker Hill was an American defeat, but cost the British a lot of troops. The Americans had built a redoubt on top of Breed's Hill to fire down upon the British forces making their way up the hill. The fighting continued until the American forces had to retreat because they ran out of ammo. This battle greatly decreased the amount of British troops in Boston. The next battle was probably the most costly for the Americans when they invaded Quebec. This battle was an American defeat. The American army tried a two-pronged attack on the city of Quebec. Benedict Arnold and his company traveled up the Kennebec River in Maine and through the Maine wilderness to Quebec, while General Montgomery and his crew traveled up Lake Champlain and the Richelieu River to Quebec. Benedict Arnold was wounded in the leg by a musket shot. The Americans got into the city, but got way too strung out throughout the streets. The Americans failed to control a major city that would have almost completely cut off the British from getting supplies and reinforcements down the inner waterways. The next part is a document by Thomas Paine called Common Sense. This was a document to encourage the troops to keep fighting no matter what happens. Next battle is Battle of Valcour Island. The Battle of Valcour Island was an American victory. The British and the Americans were sent to Lake Champlain with similar orders to destroy the other fleet. The British fleet was way too big to fit down shallow parts of the Richelieu River, so the British deconstructed their ships, moved them overland by wagon to the deeper end of the Richelieu, and rebuilt them so that they could sail down Lake Champlain. The American fleet built their ships in Whitehall, New York. They then sailed up Lake Champlain in search for the British fleet. The American fleet anchored across the bay between Valcour Island to wait for the British. The British sailed straight past Valcour Island to the Americans, so the Americans had to shoot a cannon to get their attention. The British had to turn around and tack back and forth because the wind behind them was behind them when they were headed south. The British fleet sent out gunboats to engage the American fleet. The American Royal Savage was grounded on accident. The battle lasted until it was dark. Americans then fled down the lake toward Arnold's Bay, where Benedict Arnold grounded the boats and burned them. They then headed overland to Fort Ty. The British followed them to Fort Ty, but then saw Mount Independence and turned right around and headed back for Quebec City. The next battle was when Washington crossed the Delaware to Trenton, New Jersey, and and surprised the German mercenary army that the British hired to help fight. This battle was successful and helped boost the American morale. The Americans then ambushed the British on their way back to Yorktown while a lot of them were hungry, sick, or really tired. The 2nd and 3rd New Hampshire Regiment came to help the rest of the regiments, but they were way too outnumbered. This battle showed the French that the American army would be a strong ally. Next battle, the last and final battle, was when Americans were chasing the British army through the South, keeping them away from all of their supply lines. The British finally surrendered in Yorktown. Finally, the Treaty of Paris. It wasn't signed until September 3rd, 1783. And finally, after 8 years of war, the United States of America was born. Many lives were lost, but many others were changed for the better. All over the East Coast, there are reminders of this war that created our country.